I went into my son's kitchen looking for a glass of water. What I found instead were dozens of pill bottles, all with my name on them, medications I never received. And in that moment, standing in that cold pantry, with my hands shaking and my heart pounding against my ribs, I knew with absolute certainty that my own son was trying to end me. Before we continue, please subscribe and hit that notification bell, and let us know where in the world you're watching from in the comments. Now, back to my story. My name is Rebecca Reynolds. I'm 60 years old, and this is the story of how I came back from the dead to destroy the people who tried to bury me. But before I tell you how I dismantled their lives piece by piece, you need to understand who I was before that night. You need to understand what they thought they were taking from me, and why they were so catastrophically wrong about who they were dealing with. For the past 8 years, ever since my husband Felix died of cancer, I've lived a very specific kind of life. Small, quiet, invisible. I drive a 12-year-old Honda CR-V with a dent in the passenger door that I never bothered to fix. I shop at thrift stores on senior discount days. I clip coupons from the Sunday paper like my life depends on saving 30 cents on laundry detergent. I live in a modest 1950s bungalow in a working-class neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, the same house where I raised my son Christopher, where I nursed my husband through his final days, where I learned what it meant to lose everything that mattered. To anyone watching, I'm just another elderly woman shuffling through life on a fixed income, volunteering at free health clinics, playing bridge with friends on Tuesday afternoons, bringing homemade casseroles to neighbors who are too polite to tell me they'd rather have takeout. I'm forgettable. I'm harmless. I'm exactly the kind of woman people stop seeing after a certain age, the kind who becomes invisible in grocery store lines and doctors' waiting rooms. And that invisibility, that careful camouflage of poverty and irrelevance, was entirely intentional, because what nobody knows, not my neighbors, not my bridge club friends, not even my own son, is that I'm worth $45 million. I was a nurse for over 30 years, but I wasn't just any nurse. I built something. I started with nothing, working double shifts at Providence Hospital, saving every penny, investing in real estate when the market crashed in 2008. I bought a struggling medical clinic in 2010, turned it around, expanded it into 3 locations, and sold it 5 years ago for a sum of money that would make most people's eyes water. I could have retired to a penthouse, traveled the world, lived in the kind of luxury that my years of sacrifice had earned me. But I didn't. I chose to live small. I chose to stay invisible, because I wanted my son Christopher to build his own character. I wanted him to learn the value of hard work, to understand that nothing worth having comes easy. I thought I was teaching him resilience. I thought I was preparing him for a world that doesn't hand out participation trophies. I thought wrong. Christopher is 35 now, married to a woman named Vanessa, who treats me like I'm a stain on her pristine white furniture that she can't quite scrub out. They live in an expensive craftsman house in the Pearl District, one of those meticulously renovated homes with exposed brick and industrial lighting and a mortgage that would crush most people. Christopher told me he's a pharmaceutical sales representative, successful, climbing the corporate ladder, providing the kind of life his wife demands and deserves. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because he's my son. Because when you love someone, you give them the benefit of the doubt, even when the doubt starts to feel heavier than the benefit. The cracks started showing about 6 months ago. Small things I told myself didn't matter. Christopher stopped returning my calls as quickly. When I'd visit, Vanessa would make pointed comments about my clothes, my car, the fact that I brought homemade food instead of expensive wine. She'd laugh, that sharp crystalline laugh that sounds like breaking glass, and say things like, "Rebecca, you know you don't have to live like this, right? You could sell that little house, move into a retirement community, enjoy your golden years instead of pinching pennies, like it's the Great Depression." Christopher would look uncomfortable, but he never defended me. He'd just stare at his phone, scrolling through whatever digital distraction could save him from having to choose between his wife and his mother. And I'd smile, play the role of the doddering old woman who didn't understand that she was being insulted, and I'd drive home in my dented Honda wondering when exactly I'd lost my son. The answer, I would soon discover, was that I never had him to lose. Not really. Because the person I thought I raised, the boy I sacrificed for and loved and believed in, that person never existed. What existed instead was a stranger wearing my son's face, a stranger who saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle, not as a human being, but as a transaction waiting to be completed. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks ago. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked through their door. The house felt different, colder somehow, despite the cranked-up heating that couldn't quite compensate for windows they clearly couldn't afford to replace. Vanessa greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile people use when they're trying very hard to be patient with someone they consider beneath them. I brought my famous pumpkin bread, the recipe passed down from my grandmother, the same bread I used to make for Christopher when he was a boy and would eat half the loaf before it even cooled. I'd spent all morning on it, measuring and mixing and remembering better days. Vanessa took one look at it and said, "Oh, Rebecca, store-bought would have been fine. This is so rustic." She said rustic the way other people say rotting. I also brought Christopher a gift, something I'd been saving for the right moment. It was his grandfather's medical bag, the one Felix had carried during his years as a country doctor before he moved to the city, before he met me. It was genuine leather, worn smooth by decades of house calls and emergency midnight drives. I'd had it restored, the brass clasps polished, the interior relined. It was worth several $1,000s. Not that Christopher would know that. What mattered was the history, the connection to the man who'd raised him after his biological father walked out when he was 3. I handed it to Christopher, watched his face, waited for recognition, for gratitude, for some flicker of the boy who used to beg for stories about Grandpa Felix's adventures. He barely looked at it. Vanessa picked it up, turned it over in her hands like it was a bag of garbage, and tossed it onto the side table. "What are we supposed to do with this old thing? We need cash, Rebecca, not clutter. We're drowning in renovation costs, and you bring us vintage medical supplies?" Christopher said nothing. He just took a long drink of his wine and stared at the wall. That's when the chest pains started. Not severe, just a tightness. A pressure that made it hard to take a full breath. I'd been feeling off for weeks, dizzy spells, fatigue, brain fog, but I'd chalked it up to age, to stress, to the normal decline of a 60-year-old body that had worked too hard for too long. I excused myself, said I needed to use the bathroom, tried to stand and felt the room tilt sideways. Vanessa's face came into focus, her expression shifting from irritation to something else, something I couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, but concern mixed with calculation. "Are you all right, Rebecca?" she asked, but her voice had that sickly sweet quality that made my skin crawl. I mumbled something about just needing a moment, just needing to splash some water on my face, and I stumbled down the hallway. Their house is large, too large for 2 people, with hallways that branch off in directions that don't quite make sense. I was disoriented, my vision blurring at the edges, and when I reached for what I thought was the bathroom door, I opened something else entirely. The pantry. It was dark inside, darker than it should have been, and for a moment I just stood there, my hand fumbling along the wall for a light switch. When I found it, when the fluorescent bulb flickered to life, what I saw made my blood turn to ice. Prescription bottles, dozens of them, maybe 50, maybe more, lined up on the shelves like soldiers at attention. Orange plastic cylinders with white caps, the kind every American over 50 knows by sight and by heart, and every single one of them had my name printed on the label. Rebecca Reynolds, Lisinopril 90-day supply. Rebecca Reynolds. Levothyroxine, 90-day supply. Rebecca Reynolds. Warfarin, 90-day supply. Rebecca Reynolds. Rebecca Reynolds. Rebecca Reynolds. A chorus of my own name echoing back at me from bottles I'd never seen, medications I'd never received. My hand started shaking so badly I could barely hold the first bottle I grabbed. The date on the label was from 4 months ago. The pharmacy was my pharmacy, the one 3 blocks from my house where I'd been getting my prescriptions filled for 15 years. But I never got this bottle. I never got any of these bottles. I grabbed another one. Empty. Another. Empty. Another. Nearly empty, just a few pills rattling around at the bottom. The room started spinning, and it had nothing to do with my blood pressure, which I suddenly realized had been uncontrolled for months, because I hadn't been taking my medication. Because I didn't have my medication, because someone had been intercepting it. My son. My son had been stealing my prescriptions. But why? Why would Christopher need my medication? Unless he wasn't taking them for himself? Unless he was selling them? Unless my son, the pharmaceutical sales representative, wasn't actually employed at all? Unless everything, the house, the lifestyle, the expensive furniture, and the craft cocktails, and Vanessa's designer handbags, unless all of it was built on a foundation of stolen pills and my slowly failing health. The chest pains suddenly made sense, the dizziness, the fatigue. I hadn't been taking my blood pressure medication for months. I hadn't been taking my thyroid medication. I hadn't been taking my blood thinner. My body had been screaming at me that something was wrong, and I'd ignored it. Chalked it up to age, never once suspecting that my own child was systematically poisoning me through deprivation. I heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy, purposeful footsteps coming closer. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold my phone, but I managed to pull it from my purse, managed to unlock it with trembling fingers. I started snapping pictures, flash off, sound off, just rapid-fire photos of the bottles, the labels, the dates, the damning evidence that my son was not who I thought he was. The footsteps stopped right outside the pantry door. I shoved several bottles into my purse, grabbed a handful of evidence, turned off the light, and closed the door just as Vanessa rounded the corner. She stopped when she saw me, her eyes narrowing, her head tilting slightly like a predator trying to determine if prey is wounded or just pretending. "Are you lost, Rebecca?" she asked, and there was something in her voice, something sharp and dangerous that I'd never heard before. I forced my face into a confused smile, the kind elderly women are expected to wear when they're disoriented and helpless. "I'm so sorry, dear. I thought this was the bathroom. I'm a bit turned around." Vanessa stepped closer, too close, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive and cloying. "The bathroom is the other door, right there," she pointed, but her eyes never left my face. "Are you feeling all right? You look very pale." "Just tired," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think I should head home." I started to move past her, but she touched my arm, her fingers cold even through my sweater. "Actually, before you go, I made a special digestive, my grandmother's recipe from Sicily. You should try it. It'll settle your stomach." Every instinct I'd developed in 60 years of life, every alarm bell that evolution had installed in my nervous system, every warning my body could produce started screaming at once. Do not drink what this woman gives you. Do not put anything she hands you into your mouth. But I couldn't let her know I suspected. I couldn't show my hand. Not yet. Not until I knew how deep this went, how much danger I was actually in. So I smiled. I nodded. I followed her back to the dining room where she poured a small glass of dark amber liquid from an unlabeled bottle. I accepted it, brought it to my lips, pretended to sip while actually pressing my tongue against the roof of my mouth to block my throat. The liquid touched my lips, but didn't go down. When Vanessa turned to pour herself a glass, I tipped mine into the soil of the potted plant beside my chair. I made my excuses quickly after that, said I wasn't feeling well, which was true, said I needed to get home and rest, which was also true. Christopher walked me to the door, but he wouldn't look at me, wouldn't meet my eyes. He just mumbled something about traffic and work, and he'd call me later. He didn't call me later. I drove 2 blocks, pulled over into a grocery store parking lot, and completely fell apart. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the steering wheel. My chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. The photos on my phone seemed to pulse and glow. Evidence of a betrayal so profound I couldn't quite process it. I called the only person I trusted absolutely, the only person who knew the truth about my wealth and my past, Dr. Patricia Okonkwo. My former business partner, my closest friend, the woman who'd stood beside me when Felix died, who'd helped me build my clinic from nothing, who'd celebrated with me when we sold it, and I became wealthier than either of us had ever dreamed possible. "Patty," I said when she answered, and my voice cracked on her name. "I need you. Something's very wrong. Christopher has been stealing my medications." "Where are you?" Patricia's voice shifted instantly from friendly to professional. "Are you safe?" "I'm in my car. I don't know if I'm safe. If he's been keeping me sick on purpose. If he's been—" The sentence died in my throat because finishing it meant accepting something I wasn't ready to accept. "Rebecca, listen to me." "Where exactly are you?" I told her. She said she'd be there in 10 minutes. She told me not to move, not to drive, not to do anything until she arrived. But I didn't have 10 minutes. The pain in my chest suddenly spiked, a white-hot agony that radiated down my left arm and up into my jaw. The phone slipped from my fingers. The parking lot lights blurred into streaks of color. I tried to call out, but no sound came. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the thought that Christopher had finally succeeded, that I was dying in a grocery store parking lot, and my son would get exactly what he wanted. Except I didn't die. I woke up 3 hours later in a hospital bed with Patricia standing over me, her face set in that expression doctors wear when they have very bad news and aren't sure how to deliver it. The monitors around me beeped steadily, tracking a heartbeat that should have stopped, tracking a life that someone had tried very hard to end. "You had a cardiac event," Patricia said quietly, glancing at the closed door to make sure we were alone. "Brought on by severe medication withdrawal. Rebecca, you haven't been taking your blood pressure medication for at least 4 months. Your levels are dangerously high. Your thyroid function is a disaster. You're lucky you didn't stroke out completely." "I know," I whispered. "I know why. I found the bottles, Patty, at Christopher's house. All my medications, dozens of bottles. He's been intercepting them." Patricia's face went from concern to horrified. "That's elder abuse. That's felony pharmaceutical fraud. We need to call the police right now." I grabbed her hand, held it tight. "No, not yet." "Rebecca, this isn't something you can—" "I need to know how deep it goes," I interrupted. "I need to know everything. If we call the police now, he'll lawyer up. He'll claim it was a misunderstanding, and I'll never know the truth. I need to know why, Patty. I need to know what my son has become." Patricia stared at me for a long moment. Then understanding dawned in her eyes. "What are you thinking?" I looked at the monitors, at the IV in my arm, at the hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and broken dreams, and I made a decision that would either save my life or end it. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that it's time for me to die." Patricia's eyes widened. "You want to fake your death?" "Not fake it," I corrected. "Just exaggerate how close I am. Make them think I'm barely hanging on. Make them think I'm incapacitated, helpless, unable to speak or move or defend myself, and then I'm going to go into their home, into their care, and I'm going to watch what they do when they think no one's watching. I'm going to record everything. And when I have enough evidence to bury them, when I know exactly who my son has become and what he's done, then I'm going to come back from the dead and destroy them." "That's insane," Patricia breathed. "That's dangerous. If they're already trying to kill you—" "Then they'll try again," I finished, "and this time I'll be ready. This time I'll have cameras, recordings, evidence that can't be denied or explained away. I'm a nurse, Patty. I know exactly what they're doing to me. I'll know when to stop them before it's too late." She shook her head, but I could see she was considering it. This could go very wrong. "It already has gone wrong," I said. "My son tried to kill me, is killing me, has been killing me for months. I just didn't know it. The question is not whether I'm in danger. The question is whether I'm going to die as a victim or survive as something else entirely." Patricia looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Okay, tell me what you need." What I needed was a performance. What I needed was the acting job of my life. What I needed was to become everything Christopher and Vanessa thought I was: helpless, confused, barely conscious. A body waiting for death so they could finally collect their inheritance. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I've spent 40 years taking care of people at their most vulnerable. I know exactly what a dying person looks like. I know the specific quality of labored breathing, the precise rhythm of a fading heartbeat, the exact shade of skin that signals systems shutting down. And I can fake every single one of those signs. The transformation from living person to living corpse took exactly 48 hours. Patricia and I choreographed every detail with the precision of surgeons performing a delicate operation, because that's essentially what this was: surgical deception, a carefully planned procedure where one wrong move could kill the patient. Except in this case, the patient was already supposed to be dying, and the people who were supposed to care for her were the ones holding the knife. Patricia updated my medical records to reflect a catastrophic decline: massive ischemic stroke affecting the left hemisphere, severe global aphasia, meaning I couldn't speak or understand language, right-sided hemiplegia, meaning complete paralysis of my dominant side, minimal responsiveness to external stimuli. The medical terminology was dense and technical, exactly the kind of language that makes people's eyes glaze over and accept whatever the doctor tells them without question. In simpler terms, the record said I was a vegetable, a breathing body with nobody home, a shell waiting for the lights to go out permanently. Christopher arrived at the hospital within 3 hours of Patricia's call. I watched him through barely open eyelids, my body arranged in the slack, twisted posture of someone whose brain can no longer tell their muscles what to do. He stood at the foot of my bed, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was that grief? Was that guilt? Or was that calculation, the mental arithmetic of a man determining how long he'd have to maintain the pretense of caring before he could cash in? Vanessa didn't come. She sent flowers instead, an enormous arrangement of lilies that filled the room with the sweet, cloying scent of funeral homes, and sympathy cards. The card read, "Thinking of you during this difficult time." Not, "Get well and soon." Not, "We're praying for your recovery." Just acknowledgement of difficulty, as if my impending death was nothing more than an inconvenient scheduling conflict. Patricia performed her role flawlessly. She spoke to Christopher in that particular tone doctors use when they're delivering news they know will devastate: gentle but clinical, compassionate but detached. "Your mother's prognosis is extremely poor. The stroke was massive. Even if she survives the next few days, the likelihood of any meaningful recovery is essentially zero. She'll require full-time care, likely for an extended period. We're talking about feeding tubes, round-the-clock monitoring, incontinence management, the full spectrum of end-stage neurological care." I watched Christopher's face as Patricia spoke, watched the way his eyes flickered toward the monitors, the IV bags, the machinery keeping me alive, watched him do the math. Expensive machinery, expensive care, money draining away by the hour. Money he'd been counting on inheriting, money that was supposed to solve all his problems. "How long?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that made my skin crawl even though I couldn't show it. Not, "Will she recover?" Not, "What can we do?" Just, "How long?" Patricia hesitated, playing her part perfectly. "Days, possibly weeks." Her heart is strong despite everything, but with her medication history and the severity of the stroke, we're looking at a very limited time frame. The question now is about quality of life and where she'll receive care during whatever time remains. "What are the options?" Christopher asked, and I could hear it now, the eagerness barely disguised as concern. "Hospital care, which is extremely expensive and honestly not recommended for someone in her condition. Hospice facility, which would be more comfortable but still costly. Or home care, where she'd be with family, in familiar surroundings. Home care." I could see the wheels turning behind Christopher's eyes. Home care meant my house, which he didn't know was in an irrevocable trust. Home care meant control. Home care meant privacy, meant no nurses asking inconvenient questions, meant the freedom to accelerate nature's timeline without witnesses. "We'll take her home," Christopher said, and he said it too quickly, with too much certainty. "She should be with family. She shouldn't die alone in some facility." Patricia nodded slowly. "That's very compassionate of you, Christopher. But you need to understand the level of care required. This isn't just sitting with her and holding her hand. This is medical management, feeding tubes, medication schedules, turning her every 2 hours to prevent bed sores, managing bodily functions. It's physically and emotionally exhausting." "We can handle it," Christopher said, and the lie came so easily. I wondered how long he'd been practicing deception, how many untruths he'd told me over the years that I'd accepted because I wanted to believe my son was good. They discharged me 2 days later. Patricia had arranged for a wheelchair, a hospital bed, and a collection of medical equipment that would have looked legitimate to anyone who didn't know it contained hidden cameras and audio recording devices. Every piece of monitoring equipment Patricia had selected doubled as surveillance. The pulse oximeter on my finger had a camera in its display screen. The feeding pump had a microphone sensitive enough to pick up whispered conversations from across a room. Even the seemingly innocent white noise machine beside the bed was recording everything in high-definition video. I was going into enemy territory wired for sound and sight, a spy in my own son's house, gathering evidence of my own murder. The drive to Christopher's house was surreal. I lay in the back of a medical transport van, strapped to a gurney, staring at the ceiling while strangers discussed me as if I weren't there. The paramedic kept checking my vitals and making notes on a clipboard. He spoke to Christopher in that overly loud voice people use around the elderly and disabled, as if volume could somehow penetrate the fog of my supposed brain damage. "She's stable for transport," the paramedic said. "Heart rate's a little elevated, but that's to be expected with the stress of movement. Make sure she stays hydrated. The feeding tube schedule is in the discharge papers. Any problems, any changes, you call 911 immediately." Christopher nodded. Signed papers played the role of concerned son with Academy Award precision, but I could see his hands shaking slightly as he wrote his signature. Nervousness? Guilt? Or just the tremor of a man who knows he's about to commit an unforgivable act and can't quite believe he's actually going through with it? We pulled into his driveway just as the sun was setting, painting the expensive craftsman house in shades of gold and shadow. Vanessa stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the paramedics unload my gurney with an expression that could generously be described as inconvenienced. She'd dressed for the occasion in expensive athleisure wear, the kind of outfit that costs $300 but is designed to look effortlessly casual. Her hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like she was preparing for a yoga class, not the arrival of her dying mother-in-law. They wheeled me through the front door and into what had been their guest room, except it wasn't a guest room anymore. They'd converted it into something that looked like a hospital room designed by someone who'd only seen hospitals on television. There was a medical bed, yes, but it was positioned in the coldest corner of the room, far from the window, far from any natural light. The walls were bare. The heating vent was partially blocked by furniture. A single thin blanket lay folded at the foot of the bed. This wasn't a room prepared for a loved one's final days. This was a holding cell. This was a place to warehouse an inconvenient body until it had the decency to stop breathing. The paramedics transferred me from the gurney to the bed with professional efficiency. They showed Christopher how to operate the feeding tube, how to adjust the bed's position, how to monitor the basic vital signs. They handed him a thick folder of instructions and emergency contact numbers. And then they left, and I was alone with my son and his wife, alone in a house where no one could hear me scream, even if I'd been capable of screaming. The door closed behind the paramedics. I heard the van start up and pull away. For a long moment, Christopher and Vanessa just stood there, staring at me, and the silence was so profound I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could hear the subtle hum of the hidden cameras recording every moment, could hear the future rushing toward all of us, like a freight train with no brakes. Then Vanessa spoke, and her voice was nothing like the sweet, fake concern she'd used when other people were around. "How long do we have to keep doing this?" she asked, And she wasn't asking me. She was asking Christopher, talking about me as if I were already dead, as if my body was just an object taking up space in her carefully curated home. Christopher ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood, something he did when he was stressed or scared or lying. The doctor said days, maybe weeks. Weeks? Vanessa's voice pitched upward. Christopher, we don't have weeks. The supplier wants his money in 10 days or he's sending his people. 10 days. We need that life insurance payout now. Life insurance. The words hung in the air like poisonous gas, filling my lungs, choking me even though I forced myself to keep breathing at the same steady, shallow rate. They'd taken out life insurance policies on me. Of course they had, because stealing my medication and selling it wasn't enough. They needed me to actually die so they could collect. I know, Christopher said, and he sounded tired, defeated, like a man who'd already lost whatever fight he'd been trying to wage against his own conscience. I know, okay? But we can't just smother her with a pillow. If it looks like murder, they'll investigate and then we're finished. Can't just smother me with a pillow. My own son discussing the logistics of my murder like he was planning a business meeting. And somewhere in the back of my mind, but the mother I used to be was screaming, was weeping, was trying to understand where she'd gone wrong, what she'd done or failed to do that had created this monster. But I couldn't afford to be that mother right now. Right now I needed to be something else entirely, something harder, something that could hear her child plan her death and not flinch, not move, not give away the performance. Vanessa walked closer to the bed. She looked down at me with open contempt, not bothering to hide it now that she thought I couldn't see, couldn't understand, couldn't fight back. She looks disgusting like this, drooling, just lying there. How much longer do we have to change her, feed her, pretend to care? Not long, Christopher said, and there was something new in his voice now, something that made every nerve ending in my body light up with warning. Not if we help nature along. Vanessa turned to him sharply. What does that mean? Christopher pulled out his phone, started scrolling. I've been researching. If someone's already sick, already dying, there are ways to speed up the process that don't leave obvious signs. Things that look natural, especially in someone with her medical history. I lay there, frozen, listening to my son research murder techniques on his smartphone while standing 3 feet from my bed. The hidden cameras were recording every word, every gesture, every damning piece of evidence. I'd need to destroy them. But evidence doesn't matter if you're dead. Evidence doesn't matter if they succeed before I can stop them. Like what? Vanessa asked, and she sounded genuinely curious, as if he were explaining a new recipe instead of a murder plot. Overdose of sedatives mixed with her blood thinner, Christopher said, reading from his phone. It would cause internal bleeding that could be mistaken for complications from the stroke, or withholding certain medications while giving too much of others, creating an electrolyte imbalance that stops the heart. There are dozens of ways, Vanessa, peaceful, quiet ways that don't look suspicious. Peaceful. He thought murdering his mother could be peaceful, as if the word meant anything when applied to deliberate killing, when applied to a son deciding his mother's life was worth less than his debt, worth less than his comfort, worth less than maintaining the illusion of wealth he'd built on stolen medications and borrowed money. Vanessa was nodding now, warming to the idea. How long would it take? With the right dosages, a week, maybe less. We just adjust what's going into her feeding tube. She's already barely conscious. No one would question it. Old woman, massive stroke, heart gives out from the stress. It happens every day. They were planning it. Right there, standing over my supposedly unconscious body, they were plotting the specific timeline and methodology of my death. And the most terrifying part wasn't that they were capable of it. The most terrifying part was how easy it seemed for them, how little hesitation they showed, how quickly they'd crossed the line from theft to murder. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to hear someone you love discuss killing you? Have you ever tried to imagine the specific quality of betrayal that comes from listening to your own child reduce your life to an inconvenience, to a financial problem that can be solved with the right combination of chemicals and patience? I hope you never have to find out. I hope you never have to lie perfectly still while your heart is breaking, while every instinct is screaming at you to run or fight or beg for mercy you know won't come. But if you do, if you ever find yourself in that impossible position, let me give you some advice. Don't move, don't cry, don't show them anything at all, because the only way to survive a predator is to make them believe you're already dead until the moment you're ready to show them what you really are. That night, after they'd left the room, after I heard them open a bottle of wine in the kitchen and toast to their future, I allowed myself exactly 3 minutes of silent tears, 3 minutes to grieve the son I thought I had, the future I'd imagined for us, the grandmother I'd never be because Christopher had no children and now never would because he'd chosen this path, this unforgivable darkness. 3 minutes. Then I wiped my face carefully on the pillowcase, adjusted my expression back to slack emptiness, and started planning their destruction with the same methodical precision they were using to plan my death. Patricia had given me a phone, small enough to hide under the thin mattress, with a panic button that would send immediate alerts to her and to the police. But I couldn't use it yet. I needed more evidence. I needed them to actually attempt the murder, needed to catch them in the act with such damning proof that no lawyer in the world could spin it as a misunderstanding or an accident. The next 3 days were a masterclass in human cruelty disguised as caregiving. They hired a home health aide, but only for 3 hours a day, and only the cheapest service they could find. The aide was a tired young woman named Maria, who did her best with what she had, but she was overwhelmed, understaffed, and clearly dealing with too many patients. She'd come in, check my vitals mechanically, adjust my position in the bed, change the bag on my feeding tube, and leave, all in less than 30 minutes. The rest of the time I was alone. Or worse, alone with Christopher and Vanessa. They stopped pretending to care almost immediately. Vanessa would come in to adjust the thermostat, turning the heat down to save money, leaving me in a room so cold I could see my breath, but couldn't shiver because shivering would give me away. She'd complain while she did it, monologuing to my supposedly unconscious body about how much I was costing them, how unfair it was that I was hanging on, how selfish I was being by not dying quickly. Christopher was worse because he was quieter about it. He'd sit in the chair beside my bed for hours, scrolling through his phone, researching medication interactions and fatal dosages. Sometimes he'd speak to me, and those moments were the hardest to endure. "I'm sorry, Mom," he'd say. And he'd sound like he meant it, sound like somewhere inside him there was still a remnant of the boy I'd raised. "I know you'd understand if you could. We're desperate. I made some bad choices, got in debt with some very dangerous people. This is the only way out. You're already dying anyway. We're just helping you finish what the stroke started. It's mercy. Really. You wouldn't want to live like this. Mercy." He called it mercy. As if murder could ever be rebranded as kindness, as if ending my life to solve his financial problems was somehow doing me a favor. I wanted to scream at him that I wasn't dying, that I was perfectly conscious, that I could hear every word and feel every moment of neglect and abuse. But I didn't. I stayed still. I stayed silent. I kept breathing at that shallow, irregular rate that suggested a body shutting down by degrees, and I recorded everything. On the 4th night, Patricia managed to visit, claiming she needed to check on her patient's progress. She examined me while Christopher hovered in the doorway, and I could see the questions in his eyes, the suspicion starting to form. Was the doctor too involved? Did she suspect something? Would she be a problem? Patricia played it perfectly. She sighed, made notes on a clipboard, adjusted some of the equipment. "Her vitals are declining faster than I expected," she said, and I heard the coded message beneath the words, heard her telling me she knew what they were doing, that she could see the signs of deliberate neglect. I'd estimate 72 hours, maybe less. Her organs are starting to shut down. It won't be long now. 72 hours. 3 more days of lying in this cold room, of listening to them plot my death, of pretending to be something I wasn't while gathering the evidence that would send them to prison for the rest of their lives. 3 more days of performance. 3 more days of survival. Could I do it? Could I maintain this level of absolute stillness and silence while they poisoned me by degrees? While they withheld care and comfort and basic human dignity? Could I stay frozen while every instinct screamed at me to fight, to run, to call for help? I didn't know, but I knew I had to try, because the alternative was worse than death. The alternative was dying and having them get away with it, having them collect the insurance money and live happily ever after on the proceeds of matricide, having them never face consequences for what they'd done. That night, after Patricia left, I heard them in the kitchen. I couldn't see them, but the hidden microphones picked up every word, every clink of glass, every whispered plan. They were grinding pills. I could hear the distinctive sound of pestle against mortar, crushing something into powder. "How much?" Vanessa asked. "All of them," Christopher replied. "We don't have time to be subtle anymore. The supplier is making threats. We need her gone by the end of the week." What if it's too obvious? What if they do an autopsy? They won't. She's 60. She had a massive stroke. She's been declining for days. When her heart stops, they'll just assume it was her time. No one's going to question it. Wrong. I was going to question it. The police were going to question it. The FBI was going to question it, because pharmaceutical fraud involving Medicare is a federal crime. And every word they were saying was being recorded, time-stamped, backed up to secure servers they didn't even know existed. They were building my case for me. They were constructing the evidence of their own destruction with every whispered conversation, with every Google search for untraceable poisons and how long until an overdose looks natural. They thought they were being careful, but they were actually being documented, cataloged, prepared for prosecution. The powder they were grinding went into my feeding tube mixture. I could taste it when they administered the next dose, bitter and chemical beneath the artificial vanilla flavor of the nutrition solution. My body wanted to reject it, wanted to vomit, wanted to fight, but I controlled the reflex, forced myself to accept the poison because I needed them to believe it was working. And the terrifying thing is, it was working. The sedatives they were giving me weren't fake. The blood thinners they were overdosing me with were real. I could feel my body slowing down, feel the fog creeping into my brain, feel the genuine approach of the death they were trying to cause. The line between pretending to die and actually dying was getting thinner by the hour. I texted Patricia from under the covers, my fingers fumbling with the small phone. "They're poisoning the feeding tube. How much longer can I wait?" Her response came back immediately. "Not much longer. How do you feel?" "Dizzy, weak, scared." "One more day. We need them to fully commit. Then we move. One more day of letting them poison me. One more day of playing dead while dying might become real. One more day of trusting that Patricia would get me out before the performance became permanent." Could I do it? Did I have a choice? The next morning, I didn't have to pretend to look worse. I actually was worse. My skin had taken on a grayish pallor. My breathing was genuinely labored. The poison was winning, and if we waited much longer, their murder plot would succeed despite all my careful planning. That's when I heard them arguing again, but this time it was different. This time there was panic in their voices. "The credit cards are all declined," Vanessa was practically screaming. "All of them, every single one. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything. The bank must have frozen the accounts. They must have detected suspicious activity." "What kind of suspicious activity?" "I don't know. The forged documents, maybe. The reverse mortgage on Rebecca's house. Something triggered an alert." I smiled internally despite the poison coursing through my veins. Patricia had activated the financial counterstrike. My estate attorney had flagged every fraudulent document, frozen every account Christopher had tried to access, blocked the reverse mortgage that would have stolen my home. They thought they were closing in on their payday. Instead, their financial house of cards was collapsing around them. "We're ruined," Christopher said, and he sounded genuinely terrified now. "If we don't pay the supplier by tomorrow, he's sending his people. They're going to kill us, Vanessa." "Then we need that insurance payout now," Vanessa hissed. "Tonight. We can't wait anymore." "But the doctor said—" "I don't care what the doctor said. We end this tonight. We give her the full dose. We wait for her heart to stop, and we call 911 in the morning. She passed peacefully in her sleep. They'll never know. Tonight. They were going to kill me tonight." And suddenly, I realized I'd pushed the performance too far, had waited too long, had underestimated how desperate they'd become. I had one chance left, one final trick, one last performance that would either save my life or end it. Because tonight, Rebecca Reynolds was going to die. But tomorrow, she was going to come back. And when she did, she was bringing hell with her. How do you calculate the exact moment when survival shifts from passive endurance to active war? I'll tell you exactly when. It's the moment you realize that waiting one more second means you might never get another chance. For me, that moment came at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night when I heard Christopher and Vanessa enter my room carrying what they thought would be my final dose. I'd been lying in that cold guest room for 8 days, breathing shallowly, moving minimally, performing the role of a dying woman so convincingly that my own body had started to believe it. The poison they'd been feeding me through the tube had accumulated in my system, making the performance increasingly real, blurring the line between acting and actual medical crisis. My liver was struggling. My kidneys were working overtime. My heart rhythm had developed an irregular pattern that the hidden monitors were documenting in real time, sending alerts to Patricia every few hours that said the same thing: "You're running out of time." But I needed one more piece of evidence, one final, undeniable moment where they revealed themselves so completely that no jury in the world could find reasonable doubt. I needed them to try to kill me on camera. The door opened slowly. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing steady and shallow. My body positioned in that particular way, unconscious people naturally arrange themselves. Through my barely parted eyelids, I could see them: Christopher carrying a large syringe, Vanessa holding a flashlight, both of them moving with the deliberate quiet of people who know they're doing something unforgivable. Christopher approached the bed first. His hands were shaking so badly the liquid in the syringe was sloshing visibly. He looked at Vanessa, his face pale and sweaty in the flashlight beam. "I can't do this," he whispered. "She's my mother." Vanessa's response was immediate and vicious. "She's a dying woman who's ruining our lives. That supplier is going to kill us tomorrow if we don't pay. This is survival, Christopher. It's her or us." "But murder? It's not murder if she's already dying. We're just helping her finish what nature started. Stop being weak." I watched through slitted eyes as Christopher raised the syringe, positioning it near the port on my feeding tube. This was it. This was the moment everything depended on. If I moved too soon, they'd claim they were just administering medication. If I waited too long, whatever was in that syringe would actually kill me. The hidden cameras were recording from 3 different angles. The audio was crystal clear. Every word, every gesture, every moment of premeditation was being documented. Christopher's hand touched the feeding tube port. He started to insert the syringe, and that's when I opened my eyes, not slowly, not gradually. I snapped them open fully, both at once, and turned my head to look directly at him. For a split second, Christopher froze, his brain unable to process what his eyes were seeing. His supposedly unconscious, mostly dead mother was staring at him with eyes that were completely alert, completely aware, and completely furious. Then I moved. I sat up in bed, ripping away the thin blanket, pulling the feeding tube from my nose in one smooth motion that made both of them stumble backward. The syringe fell from Christopher's hand and shattered on the floor, spreading whatever poison they'd prepared across the hardwood in a pool of damning evidence. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. My knees wobbled slightly from days of immobility and the accumulated poison in my system. But I locked them straight, forced my body to obey, made myself into something they couldn't have anticipated, a dead woman walking. "Hello, Christopher," I said. And my voice was clear and strong and nothing like the silent invalid they thought they'd been caring for. "Hello, Vanessa. Thank you for the medication, but I think I'll pass." Vanessa let out a sound that was half scream, half gasp. She dropped the flashlight and it rolled across the floor, sending shadows dancing up the walls like demons celebrating. Christopher just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "Mom?" he finally managed. You can talk? You can move?" But the doctor said exactly what I told her to say, I interrupted. "I've been awake this entire time, Christopher. Every moment, every conversation, every whispered plan to murder me. I heard all of it." I walked toward them, slowly, deliberately, watching them back away until they hit the wall. "I heard you steal my medications. I heard you plan to poison me. I heard you discuss how long it would take for me to die and how much money you'd make from my insurance policy. I heard everything, and more importantly, I recorded everything." I gestured to the medical equipment around the room. "Every piece of machinery in this room has a camera or a microphone or both. Every word you've said in this house for the past 8 days has been documented, time-stamped, and uploaded to secure servers. The police have copies. The FBI has copies. Your conversations about pharmaceutical fraud, federal crime, your discussions about murdering me, attempted murder with premeditation, the forged documents trying to steal my house, identity theft, and fraud. You didn't just try to kill me, children. You built a comprehensive case for your own prosecution." Vanessa found her voice first, and it came out as a shriek. "You set us up. You lying bitch. You set us up." "No," I said calmly. "I gave you every opportunity to stop. I gave you days to show mercy, to demonstrate even the smallest shred of human decency. You could have called for real medical help. You could have actually cared for me. You could have confessed to what you'd done and asked for forgiveness. Instead, you chose to accelerate my death because you needed insurance money to pay off your drug dealer. You set yourselves up. I just made sure there would be evidence." Christopher slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his face in his hands. "We're dead," he whispered. "We're finished." "Not yet," I said. "But you will be. The police are already outside. Dr. Okonkwo called them 10 minutes ago when the monitors detected you entering the room with that syringe. They've been waiting for me to give the signal that I was safe." I pulled the small phone from my pocket, the one I'd kept hidden under the mattress for 8 days, and pressed the emergency button Patricia had programmed. Within seconds, I heard footsteps on the porch, the heavy, authoritative knock of law enforcement. "Portland Police, open the door." Vanessa lunged for the bedroom door like she was going to make a run for it, but I stepped into her path. For a woman who'd been supposedly paralyzed and dying for over a week, I moved surprisingly fast. Years of nursing had kept me strong, and rage had given me energy that transcended the poison still working through my system. "Don't even think about it," I said quietly. "There's nowhere to run. The house is surrounded." The front door burst open. I heard the familiar sounds of a police entry, shouted commands, heavy boots, the organized chaos of a tactical team securing a scene. Within 30 seconds, 2 officers appeared in the bedroom doorway, weapons drawn, taking in the scene, me standing, clearly alive and alert, Christopher on the floor weeping, Vanessa frozen against the wall, and on the floor between us, the shattered syringe with its lethal contents. "Rebecca Reynolds?" one of the officers asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "That's me," I confirmed. "Very much alive, as you can see. These 2 people are Christopher Reynolds and Vanessa Reynolds. For the past 8 days, they've been systematically poisoning me while I documented their actions." That syringe on the floor contains what I believe was intended to be a lethal dose of sedatives. The feeding tube they've been using to administer poison is right there on the bed, and every moment of their attempted murder has been recorded by the equipment in this room." The officer nodded to his partner, who immediately began reading Christopher and Vanessa their rights. The words were familiar from 1,000 television shows, but hearing them applied to my own son made them sound different, hollow and terrible and final. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Vanessa started screaming then, a high sustained note of fury and denial that probably woke every neighbor on the block. "This is entrapment. She tricked us. She can't do this." "Ma'am, please calm down," the officer said. But Vanessa was beyond calm, beyond reason. "She set us up. She pretended to be dying. She lied to us." The officer looked at me, one eyebrow raised in question. "I never lied," I said evenly. "I simply didn't correct their assumptions. They stole my medications, which caused a genuine medical crisis. When I recovered enough to understand what they were doing, I chose to observe rather than confront. Everything they did of their own free will. Every decision to poison me, every conversation about accelerating my death, every moment of neglect and abuse, those were their choices." Christopher finally spoke, his voice muffled by his hands. "Just let them arrest us. It's over. We're done." But Vanessa wasn't done. Even as the officer moved to handcuff her, she turned her venom on Christopher, revealing in her panic exactly what their relationship really was. "This is your fault," she screamed at him. "You're the one who got us into debt. You're the one who lost your job and lied about it for 3 years. You're the one who started stealing her medications. I didn't even know about it until 6 months ago." "That's a lie," Christopher said, lifting his head, and suddenly they were turning on each other, each desperate to shift blame, to minimize their own culpability. "You planned the whole thing," Christopher shot back. "You're the one who researched the insurance policies. You're the one who figured out the dosages. You told me we had no choice. Because we didn't. Because you gambled away $200,000 to criminals who were going to kill us." The officers let them argue, let them incriminate each other while body cameras recorded every word. It was almost beautiful in its perfect, terrible symmetry. 2 people who'd conspired to murder me for money, now destroying each other for free. Patricia arrived just as they were leading Christopher and Vanessa out in handcuffs. She rushed past the police tape, pushed through the gathering crowd of neighbors, and found me standing in the living room, wrapped in a blanket an EMT had provided, watching my son be loaded into a police car. "Rebecca," she breathed, wrapping me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "Thank God. When I saw the syringe on the monitor, I thought we'd waited too long." "We almost did," I admitted. My legs were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Whatever they were giving me, it was working. Another day, and I don't know if I could have stopped them. "You need to go to the hospital," Patricia said, shifting immediately into doctor mode. "We need to flush your system, run full labs, make sure there's no permanent damage." "I know," I said. But I couldn't move yet. I couldn't look away from the police car where Christopher sat in the back seat, his head bowed, his life effectively over. He was 35 years old. He'd just thrown away his entire future for money he didn't even need because he never knew I had millions. He'd murdered his mother, or tried to pay off debts that were meaningless compared to the wealth I'd accumulated in secret. The waste of it all was staggering, the unnecessary cruelty, the pointless destruction. A detective approached me, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Ms. Reynolds, I'm Detective Sarah Martinez. I understand you've been through something traumatic, but I need to ask you some questions while everything is fresh." "Of course," I said. She led me to the couch, away from the chaos of the crime scene processing. "Dr. Okonkwo provided us with the recordings and documentation. What you did was incredibly dangerous. You know that, right?" "I know," I said, but it was the only way to make sure they couldn't claim it was a misunderstanding. If I'd called the police when I first found the stolen medications, they would have said it was a mistake, a mix-up with the pharmacy. I needed them to fully commit to the act, so there would be no doubt about intent. Detective Martinez nodded slowly. The recordings are extensive. We have enough to prosecute for attempted murder, elder abuse, pharmaceutical fraud, identity theft, and probably a dozen other charges. The DA is going to have a field day with this case. Good, I said, and I meant it. Over the next 3 months, I watched from a safe distance as the case against Christopher and Vanessa built into an unstoppable force. The recordings were damning. The physical evidence was irrefutable. The testimony from Patricia, from the pharmacists who'd filled prescriptions I never received, from the financial investigators who traced the stolen medication sales, from the underworld supplier who turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. All of it painted a picture of calculated, premeditated attempted murder, motivated by greed and desperation. Their lawyers tried everything. They claimed I'd entrapped them. They argued that the recordings were illegal. They suggested that I'd manipulated events to appear worse than they were. But every argument fell apart under scrutiny. I'd broken no laws. I'd simply refused to die on their timeline and documented their crimes in the process. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 full days, walking the jury through every moment, finding the medications in the pantry, realizing what Christopher had done, making the decision to fake my incapacitation, enduring the neglect and abuse, recording the evidence, and finally revealing myself when they came to deliver what they thought would be the killing blow. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Christopher received 18 years in federal prison. Vanessa received 20 because of additional fraud charges related to her fake influencer lifestyle and the identity theft schemes she'd been running independently. Neither would be eligible for parole because attempted murder of a family member carries mandatory minimum sentences. I sat in the courtroom when the verdicts were read. Christopher wept. Vanessa screamed at the judge. And I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, not even relief. Just a hollow emptiness where my son used to be. After the sentencing, after the media circus died down, after the true crime podcast stopped calling me for interviews, I made some changes. I sold the bungalow where I'd raised Christopher, where I'd lived small and invisible for so long. The house went to a young family with 3 children, people who would fill it with the kind of life it deserved. I took the money and donated it to a charity that helps seniors escape financial abuse. I bought a beautiful modern condo in downtown Portland, all windows and light, with a view of the city that takes my breath away every morning. I decorated it with art I actually like, instead of yard sale finds. I bought comfortable furniture. I started living like the successful woman I am instead of pretending to be someone I'm not, and I used my fortune to establish the Felix Reynolds Foundation for Elder Protection, named after my late husband. The foundation provides legal services, medical advocacy, and safe housing for seniors facing abuse from family members. In the first year alone, we helped over 3,000 people escape situations like mine. We've recovered more than $50 million in stolen assets. We've put more than 200 abusers in prison. My son tried to kill me, but instead of destroying me, he accidentally gave me a purpose. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Christopher. It was forwarded through my lawyer because I'd made it clear I wanted no direct contact. The letter was 5 pages long, handwritten, full of apologies and excuses and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I read it once. Then I burned it. 2 months after that, he tried again. This time I didn't even open it. I sent it back, marked Return to Sender. But 3 months ago, I decided to visit him. Just once. Just to see if there was anything left of the boy I'd raised, or if that person had been an illusion all along. The prison was exactly what you'd expect. Gray, cold, oppressive. They led me to a visiting room that smelled of industrial cleaner and broken dreams. Christopher was already sitting at a table, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look younger somehow, more vulnerable. He'd lost weight. His hair was graying at the temples. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the year since his arrest. When he saw me, he started crying immediately. "Mom," he said, and the word was choked with tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I know what I did was wrong. I was desperate and scared, and I made terrible choices. Please forgive me. Please. I'm your son. I sat down across from him. I looked at this man who shared my DNA, who I'd given birth to, who I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and I felt like I was looking at a stranger. You're not sorry you did it, I said quietly. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. No, I am sorry, he insisted. I think about it every day. What I did, what I almost did. I can't believe I was capable of it. But you were capable of it, I said. That's what you don't seem to understand. You didn't become a different person when you decided to kill me. You revealed who you've always been. The only question is whether I was too blind to see it or whether you hid it too well. Christopher reached across the table toward my hands, but I pulled them back. I made mistakes, he said. Terrible mistakes. But I'm still your son. Doesn't that count for something? You stopped being my son the day you ground up those pills and put them in my feeding tube, I said. You made a choice, Christopher. You chose money over my life. You chose comfort over my safety. You chose yourself over everything I'd given you for 35 years. That choice has consequences. So what? You're just going to abandon me? Leave me here to rot? I'm not abandoning you, I said. I'm accepting reality. You tried to murder me. That's not something a mother forgives, regardless of what the greeting cards say about unconditional love. You want to know the truth? There's no such thing as unconditional love. Every relationship has a line that once crossed can never be uncrossed. You found that line and you sprinted across it with a syringe full of poison. I stood up to leave. Mom, please, Christopher begged. Will you ever come back? Will I ever see you again? I looked at him for a long moment, at the tears on his face, at the desperation in his eyes, at the man who was supposed to be my legacy, my contribution to the future, my reason for all those years of sacrifice. I don't know, I said honestly. Right now, I don't even know who you are. I walked out of that prison and into the bright afternoon sunlight. I got into my car, a new one. A nice one that I'd paid cash for because I could afford it, and I drove back to my beautiful condo with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its view of the city I loved. That night, I hosted a dinner party. Patricia came along with her husband and children. Several volunteers from the foundation came. Friends from my bridge club. People who genuinely cared about me, who saw value in me beyond what I could provide financially. We laughed. We told stories. We ate good food and drank good wine and celebrated life, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't even realized I'd been missing. Peace. People often ask me if I regret what I did, if I feel guilty for setting up my son, for deliberately creating a situation where he would incriminate himself, for choosing justice over mercy. The answer is no, not for a single second. Because here's what I learned. Mercy is not the same as enabling. Forgiveness is not the same as accepting abuse. And family is not defined by blood, but by behavior. Christopher had every opportunity to be a good son. He had love, support, education, encouragement. What he didn't have was money, because I wanted him to earn his own way. And when he couldn't, when he failed and fell into debt, instead of asking for help, instead of trusting that his mother might understand, might support him, might have resources he didn't know about, he chose murder. That choice reveals character. That choice shows values. That choice demonstrates exactly who he is at his core. And I refuse to feel guilty for defending my life against someone who decided it was worthless. I'm 60 years old. I built a medical empire from nothing. I survived poverty, widowhood, cancer taking my husband, and my own son's attempt to put me in the ground. I have money, health, purpose, and genuine relationships with people who see me as more than a resource to be exploited. I'm not a victim. I'm not a survivor. I'm a warrior who fought back when people underestimated me because of my age, my gender, my apparent poverty. And I'm not finished yet. The foundation is expanding to 6 new cities next year. We're lobbying for stronger elder protection laws. We're training healthcare workers to recognize signs of abuse. We're creating systems that make it harder for people like Christopher to steal, to forge documents, to exploit the elderly. Every senior we save, every abuser we prosecute, every life we protect, that's my revenge. Not against Christopher specifically, but against the societal assumption that elderly people are disposable, that we're weak, that we can be pushed aside or eliminated when we become inconvenient. We're not. We're dangerous when you underestimate us. We're powerful when you try to silence us. And we're absolutely ruthless when you threaten our survival. So let me leave you with this. If you're watching this and you're in a situation where someone is draining you, financially, emotionally, physically, where someone is making you feel worthless or expendable, or like your only value is what you can provide, hear me clearly. You don't owe them your destruction. You don't owe them your silence. You don't owe them your life. Blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does. Respect does. Love does. And real love never asks you to die for someone else's convenience. Fight back. Protect yourself. And if that means cutting off the people who are supposed to love you, then cut them off without guilt or hesitation. Because your life has value. Your dignity matters. And you deserve to live in peace, not to die in silence. I'm Rebecca Reynolds. I'm 60 years old. I'm worth $45 million that I earned myself. My son tried to kill me, and I sent him to prison for 18 years, and I've never been happier. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to cut off a family member for your own survival? Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted betrayed you? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below. And if you found this story powerful, if it resonated with you, if it gave you the courage to protect yourself, then hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because we tell stories about people who fight back, who refuse to be victims, who choose survival over silence. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's being drained by toxic family, someone who thinks they have to accept abuse because family is family. Because family isn't family when they're trying to kill you, and you deserve better. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.